Welcome to the show, Dr. Beth Dolginko. How are you?
Very good, thank you, Paul. Very
good
to be here.
You have a lot of cool stuff. I've known you for a while, and
Yes.
it turns out you have an amazing book out.
Yes, sir.
Tell us what you did to lead up to this. I know you're a licensed art therapist.
Yeah, I am an art therapist in New York State. Creative arts therapists are licensed all together, and they're called LCATs. And so that would include music therapists, drama therapists, dance and movement therapists, poetry therapists. And I'm also credentialed nationally through the American Art Therapy Association. I'm a board-certified registered art therapist. And I've been doing this for 45 years. I started working in 1974. I started my master's and actually started working because my internship turned into my first job.
Wow, congratulations.
And my first job was with in a state hospital with people with developmental disabilities because I was on the Willowbrook task force, and we went over to Willowbrook after the Geraldo Rivera expose.
Yeah, I watched that documentary multiple times. Scary thing to watch. Too,
it was very scary, but New York State had to respond, and so the Willowbrook consent decree was a mandate from New York State, and what they did was to begin to return everybody that was in Willowbrook to their county of origin, as well with some of the other big state, they used to call them state schools. So there was Letchworth, a couple of other ones, Wassaic State School. So the people there all had some kind of what they called mental retardation in those days, or developmental disabilities, and it was a catch-all. Some people were there from birth, some people were placed there at some point in their lives. And basically, when I say placed there, they stayed there. So when the expose by Geraldo Rivera happened, New York State had to respond and started first sending people back to their counties of origin, but putting them into smaller facilities called intercommunity facilities. So that's what I worked in. And the idea was that they were supposed to come from the large institutions to the ICF, intercommunity facility, and then we prepared them to go out into the community. It was quite challenging.
I can't imagine what that experience was like.
Quite interesting, just even going over to Willowbrook and seeing such a gigantic state institution.
What was the defense with that? I mean, you couldn't really defend something like that, the horrific things that were happening there.
No, but it was really just no laws or policy really existed to protect a lot of people. And really in the 70s that began. And it first started with people who were developmentally disabled, but then it kind of continued into psychiatric and mental health. So as well, the large state hospitals started to, get smaller. People didn't stay forever, and people were moved back into the community. The people with developmental disabilities were moved back with a greater success level. Mental illness is another issue, and people with mental illness had more difficulty. But as I said, some of these people grew up in institutions. They were remarkable. They were the ones who actually called Geraldo Rivera.
Wow.
And I talk about that in the book. They just were sick of it, and they called ABC, CBS, NBC, the New York Times, the Daily News, and the New York Post themselves. These were the residents of Willowbrook, the so-called retarded people. Wow. And Geraldo Rivera listened. And that was really, in a way, also the beginnings of investigative reporting. So he came and that really shut down a lot of institutions, where they started really phasing out those type of institutions.
Right,
and moving people into the community, or at least making more reasonable. Places like Pilgrim still have people that stay there for a long time. That I know that's psychiatric, but it still is more humane, smaller,
more
much
funding,
greater,
much more resources, things like that.
Much greater staff ratio. So, I mean,
you see a lot more, especially today, and it's funny because we have guests that are, relating to community outreach and community connections and things like that. You see a big pull towards those type of connections.
Right.
Staff working with individuals out in the community, working one-on-one, helping them with their life skills or social skills.
That's right. But none of that would have happened if the Willowbrook expose had not happened. And then also, sort of at the same time, special education was coming into law. On a federal level. You started to have the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And then that was put into whatever iteration each state put it in. New York State being one of the best as far as dealing with people with special education needs. So that sort of all kind of happened in the 70s, and it really did make a change in terms of people being more included into the community.
Definitely.
And, it just, like you said, there were more support. And even just as far as special education goes, if you look at the schools, at least New York State has transition services, right?
Definitely.
So
They've definitely
start
been
in
these
middle
last few
school.
years, you see a lot more improvements.
That's right. And people are in schools. Back in the day, people weren't in schools. Or there was like one classroom, like in the basement, that everybody was there, regardless of what diagnoses they had.
Yeah. And did this work ultimately lead you to do things with the art therapy?
Well, no, I was an art therapy student
Okay.
and then became an art therapist. And so I always did use art therapy, and the creative arts therapies really work well with anybody who has difficulty expressing themselves verbally.
I think everybody enjoys art. I mean, there's very few people that I say hate art.
Well, honestly, when a lot of people are adults, they don't want to do art.
They're too busy. They don't have time to sit down.
No, it's really.
You see a lot of this wine and paint things. You see a lot of those.
Yeah, no, actually, I think that's kind of a good idea. But as long as people don't drive home. But I also have worked in many settings: special education, early childhood, and behavioral health or
I've
psychiatric.
seen over the years you have a lot of different workshops you do.
Right. Well, now we're licensed in New York State, like I said, as an LCAT, and so we have to have continuing education. Mm-hmm. So I'm a registered New York State provider for LCAT continuing education.
Mm-hmm.
Social workers can't come to me, mental health counselors can't, but creative arts therapists can. And as I said, it's just one of those things where people, once they get to be 7th or 8th grade, if they don't do art well, they don't do it anymore.
Yeah.
So when I worked with adults in behavioral health, I had trouble sometimes getting people to do art. But people will try it if you kind of say it's a judgment-free zone. And also, like I said, the other creative arts therapies are wonderful. Drama therapy, dance and movement therapy.
We did that with the Buddy Club at one point. We were doing those type of act. They get together and they get to perform different plays and different little acts together. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of drama therapy.
Showstoppers,
But they're LCATs.
Yeah.
So that's, so then I continued through the years. And what I became very aware of is that there's lots written about kids with autism, but not adults. So when I started going to art therapy conferences or whatever and doing presentations on adults with autism spectrum disorder, people flocked to my workshops because they were starving for it. It's like, I have one friend he's like, I'm the fan club, I'm your president of your fan club, because he would come to all my presentations because he works with adults.
Well, you see that. You see a lot of people who are a bit older saying, I wish they had the resources, they had the classes, they wish they had the tools to diagnose different things at a younger age, so they could have gotten the correct help early on.
Right.
And that what led to you. So this is, I'm guessing, your years of work in the field.
Well, what happened was, a few years ago, I did a presentation at the art therapy conference called, art therapy. It was actually called Creative Neural Landscapes, because they were focusing on sort of the neurodiversity is kind of a big thing now, and Temple Grandin is sort of an advocate of that. Mm-hmm. And so the Art Therapy Association asked me if they could record my presentation and use it for their continuing ed institute. So that's now recorded, and that.
How long was that segment?
Probably about an hour. And then a year ago, at the same conference rather, Jessica Kingsley Press was there, and they contacted me right at the conference, and they were like, this is really an area that needs more written, and so they offered me the contract.
I hope you don't mind. I went to this random page in the book, and I really like this one sentence here. If you don't mind, I read it.
Go right ahead.
Okay. Every person brings personal history into a treatment situation. An awareness of the path of typical human development must be understood to be able to support a patient's differences in developmental history. It's really interesting. It's true. I think that you need to really take an individual approach when you're helping individual. I mean, you can't just take a cookie cutter way of fixing someone or helping someone or aiding someone, because everybody is very unique in their needs and accommodations.
It's true, but the way that I work is really I'm also a psychoanalyst, so I work from a developmental perspective, and I think that started right away when I was working for New York State. It was Queens Developmental Center was the facility, and just seeing differences in development and then seeing, for example, one of the men who called, brought in media to Willowbrook had cerebral palsy. And I would say he had Asperger's. He wasn't necessarily diagnosed with that because they just kind of threw people into...
Back then, they didn't have the resources.
He clearly had cerebral palsy. That was enough for them. And he just was very, very, he's very, very smart. But at the same time, he socially and emotionally was at a much earlier level of development because he grew up in an institution. So actually in the book, I call it like developmental layering, because somebody is 28 years old and maybe they have a job, but maybe they can't read. So they're
functioning at different levels.
You have to kind of pay attention to those different levels and adjust the therapeutic interventions
based on their needs.
And that's not just true with people with autism. It's true with
people
all
with
the
learning
patients I
disabilities,
work
and even
with.
my school, and I have an IEP, and I work I have certain accommodations that are there to help me, in a way, level the playing field, because everybody has strengths, everybody has
That's
weaknesses, and the idea is, you see a big movement today. The schools are willing to do whatever it takes to help you be as successful.
That's right.
But unfortunately, it does. That creates opportunity for people to maybe take advantage of the resources, and that's a whole nother
My
conversation.
attitude is, if there's those people that are going to take advantage, then good for them, and whatever.
As long as it doesn't
there's
ruin it
so
for the
many
people,
other
yeah.
people that have benefited from the advantages
Definitely.
that policy change and
I agree.
legislation and education have created. So it's like one of those things where it's like,
Is what it
there's
is.
always the scammers.
There's always that person. So towards the end of this, I wanted to actually really talk more about this book, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Next time we should have a little display to kind of. I'm modeling the book today.
There you go.
It looks good.
You Vanna White, huh?
I like it. I like the. So tell us, a little bit more about this book, and maybe what people can expect from reading this. Where could they find it? Things like that.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's a page turner. If you're, an art therapist, you might find it a lot more interesting than if you do something else with your life. But I would think anybody that's in any kind of mental health field might find it interesting, or maybe applicable to the work that they do. As I said, I work from a developmental perspective. So in the beginning of the book, I kind of talk about different levels of development as well as different levels of art development. And specifically for this book, because it's supposed to be adults, I don't really talk about the earlier levels, but more like sort of latency age, like school age, adolescence,
the stages now.
and then the stages of adulthood.
Yeah.
And because that's
also
what I'm talking about
if
in
it
the
was
book.
all about kids and they're reading this book, and as an adult, like, this is all great, but how can I make positive changes in my life right now? What can I do now?
Well, they'd have to read another book,
Yeah.
because my focus is...
They might need to make another one, though. You never know.
Well, actually, I am writing another book.
All right.
I'm under contract with Routledge Press to write. I'm writing a book about the applications of developmental art to art therapy interventions. So stay tuned. That should be
Maybe we'll have you back on to talk about that book.
Sure.
Now, where can people maybe find this book, or also find workshops, or contact you? What kind of services are you offering currently?
Well, as an art therapist, I do therapy with people of all ages and all different kinds
Walks of life. Yeah.
emotional lives. But if it's somebody with autism, they can often get the services paid for through
Insurance?
Probably Medicaid through
okay.
through transition services, self-directed services, or somehow paid under their self-directed accounts.
Perfect.
So, I mean, if somebody called me and they wanted to be in therapy, I could
You work with
direct them to. I would certainly work with them, even if they were self-pay, whatever. I'm willing to. But if they wanted to have it paid through their self-directed services, I would help.
That's great.
There's parents and brokers that I work with who can get that all in place for them.
Perfect.
But I also am, as I said, a registered provider for New York State licensed creative arts therapy continuing ed, so I do that. And I am writing a lot these days.
Where can people reach out to you? Email, a number? What's the best
Email,
way?
yeah, I think.
And I can post that in the description of the video. I'll
Okay,
post that.
sure. So the best way to contact would be my email, which would be Dolginko. It's DDOLGINKO at AOL.com. And my number is 631-754-2278. And just so you guys know, It is a landline.
Yes. No, don't text that number. Right? You're not gonna get a response.
And this is a book that's available through Amazon.
Amazon?
Yeah.
Perfect. I think we may have heard that once or twice, Amazon. It's a pretty popular thing.
Yeah.
So people can go on Amazon to get your book. And yeah, I really appreciate you coming on. Is there anything else you want to say to the viewers about maybe your workshops or different services?
No, just if you want to know. I also have a website, which I certainly couldn't say that off.
I'll put that in the description.
You can
Don't
put
worry.
that down.
Listen, you couldn't say the website. I had trouble with your last name. We're even now, okay?
So, but it's you know, I've been very impressed by the work you're doing, and I appreciate it. And you know, I did do some groups I started doing SEPTA groups like years ago, and then when everybody was kind of aging out, I kept some groups going.
I heard that, yeah.
But it's hard because it was drop-in. So
Yes.
sometimes I'd have one person, sometimes I'd have 7, 8, 10. But I also, unfortunately, the reality of the world is insurance. My husband was getting nervous about people going up and down because I had like video games upstairs.
Yes, we have cool. I've been to your house a few times that you're hanging out with your son, and you have this cool wooded area in the back. We play airsoft and
and we
all that
have Max's trains down in the basement, and so just my husband was getting a little nervous with people going up and down stairs or coming up a icy driveway. So as much as I would have liked to kept the groups going, and like I said, I didn't care if one person showed up.
Yeah, you do it because you enjoy doing it. Yeah.
But I did get a little nervous about that.
Okay. Well, thank you, Beth, for coming on. People can please reach out. They've got the book on Amazon. And I look forward to connecting with you and, becoming better friends and learning from you as I go through the social work department, get my degree.
Yes, definitely.
So thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
You a hugger? I'm a hugger.
Sure.
Very cool. Just stay here for a second while we
Okay.
get some B-roll footage.